What's good, Dogmatica Nation? Today I wanted to bring you a Worm deck profile for Tengu Plant September 2011 format. Basically, I'm going to be entering tournaments over the weekend. Two, actually. One I'll be entering online tomorrow at noon. I'll probably stream it, actually, on Friday. And then another I'll be driving to over in New York on Saturday. The lists will be a little bit different depending, mostly the side deck, because I know what's at my locals versus, an online tournament. I'm going to want to be prepared. But this is a Worm deck profile for September 2011 ban list. I would like to clarify that the main deck, I got the idea from TCG Rewind. Be sure to be subscribed to TCG Rewind. He's like the grandfather of our format. He's the GOAT. He is truly the GOAT. So aside from subscribing to me, definitely give his channel a subscribe as well. I changed up the side deck, and I also have a new tech card that I decided to add to his version of the list. So let's get started. We have 3 copies of Worm Zex, 2 copies of Worm Yagen. So these cards are obviously the infamous combo. You normal summon Worm Zex and dump Worm Yagen, and then Worm Yagen can set itself face down. And then, of course, it's banished when it leaves the field. Now, we're only on 2 because we're actually playing a Chaos version of the deck, so we had to make room for all of the other, gizmos and gadgets that come with playing a Chaos variant of this deck. The rest of the Worm monsters are, of course, Triple Worm Carteros. When he's flipped face up, you can add a Reptile-type Worm monster from your deck to your hand. And, of course, the boss monster of the deck, Worm King. It's mandatory that you have to play one of him because of how the trap card works. He's like a brick that summons from the deck. He's not terrible if you draw him, because you can tribute summon him by tributing one Worm monster, so he becomes like a Caius. And his effect is that he has a non-once per turn to tribute a Reptile-type Worm monster to destroy a card your opponent controls. So obviously that's incredibly powerful for an in-archetype boss monster. So we have our search card, we have a card that dumps from deck to grave, and then we have a card that revives itself. And one thing I didn't mention about Worm Yagen is that when he's flipped face up, which we have several ways to do in this deck, he can bounce an opponent's monster. Right, so that's our Worm cards for the deck. The next is everyone's favorite engine for some dark monsters. We have Tour Guide from the Underworld. When she's normal summoned, we can special summon a level 3 Fiend from our deck, but we can't use it for a synchro summon. So the main target is Sangan. Of course, Sangan, in our archetype, it can really only search Worm Carteros or Yagen, but we also have Effect Veiler as a search, as well as our other engine for more dark monsters that synergize with our deck. The Dark Mimic engine. So you can summon Dark Mimic off of Tour Guide, of course. But in addition, it's just additional darks because our deck is a nice mix of combo and control. When we set a monster turn 1, they might expect it to be a Yagen. So, they attack into this, it flips face up, you draw a card, you now have a dark in the grave, and you can Call of the Haunted, which we're on in this deck, to bring it back. And then once you Call of the Haunted, bring back the level 1 Mimic. On your standby phase, it floats into a Dark Mimic level 2. So now what you can do is you can punch into... You can either crash with a Tour Guide with 1000 attack, you can crash with an Agent of Earth, an Earth Agent, and you'll draw 2 cards instead of just 1. Basically, if this card's destroyed by battle, you can draw a card. But if you summoned it off of Dark Mimic level 1, you get to draw 2 cards instead. So that's really neat, and this being a flip monster is very relevant, as you'll find out when we get to a later portion of the deck profile. So that's 7 darks for our dark part, and our Worm engine is about 9 cards, so that's 9 lights, plus a few other gizmos and gadgets. We have, of course, the boss monsters, 2 Chaos Sorcerer, and 1 BLS. These cards are pretty good because Chaos Sorc, in addition to just being a banish, it gives us access to Arcanite Magician because our only tuner monster is the Effect Veiler, which we usually search off of Sangan. So, aside from the fact that we're on Call of the Haunted to repeatedly use Sangan, if we don't want to do the Dark Mimic or don't want to bring back a worm monster, it's nice to be able to banish something and then go into Arcanite and you can remove 2 more cards from the field. And then, of course, BLS is just the best card of the format, objectively, in terms of boss monsters. And to round out our monsters, of course, we have 2 Effect Veiler. Not much needs to be said other than the fact that it allows for synchro plays, which is nice. We can make the Arcanite Magician, we can make Catastor and Librarian. And then, of course, we also make Formula Synchron because Dark Mimic is a level 1. It's the only hand trap we're on in the main deck. We have others, of course, in the side deck. We have, of course, the 5 power spells of the format. We have Dark Hole, not much explanation needed. Heavy Storm, we're not main decking MST, so this is like all our back row removal, but we have 3 in the side deck, of course. Monster Reborn and Mind Control. We actually have a lot of XZs. When I say a lot, right, you're used to like 4 at most, really, unless you double up on one of them. We're on 5 independent names, so we have a lot of variety we can go into with our rank 4s and 3s with Mind Control and Reborn. And of course we have synchros as well, be it we steal a tuner or we have a Veiler in hand. We have pretty much an option for every level, so not much explanation needed for those. And Book of Moon. This is actually extremely relevant in our deck because of the flip monsters. So like if they go to Veiler your Worm Carderos, when you flip summon it, you can Book of Moon your own guy. Another reason is that, it's just nice to be able to Book of Moon Christias, and other vanities, other boss monsters that we struggle to out because we're reliant on special summons. So, that's that. And 2 more spells. This is where the tech card comes into play. Instead of playing 2 Duality that Tyler was playing in his deck, we're playing 2 Gold Sarcophagus. Now, both, you can argue that it's slow, but so is Duality, right? We are halfway between a combo and control deck. This is truly like a mid-range deck because Duality is nice, but it feels really bad when you open Worm Zex or Tour Guide because obviously those are special summons. Now, if you open Carderos or Dark Mimic level 1, you would actually rather see Duality than this. But I figured this is a nice card to bridge the gap, and we're also on a couple of spicy one-ofs in our side deck that I wanted to be able to see. Especially for the monsters, because if you'll remember from my agent deck profile, one of the things that we could do was banish like a Thunder King, and then bring it back if we opened Tour Guide immediately, without having to wait for like Duality to do something similar. So that's why we're on 2 Gold Sark to round out the spell cards. On to the trap cards. We are a sort of control deck, so we have to have several here. The first card, W Nebula Meteorite. Now, this is like the first and only in-archetype trap card. Some lists will play the Icarus attack for reptiles. However, our worm count is a little bit too low to justify it. So this is the card here. This card is insane. This is like one of the craziest cards in the format, but only this deck can play it. Change all face-down monsters on the field to face-up defense position. And that includes your opponent's monsters. It doesn't just have to be your reptiles. During the end phase, change all face-up light reptile monsters you control to face-down defense position, then draw 1 card for each. After that, you can special summon 1 level 7 or higher light reptile monster from your deck. So that's all 1 effect. Right, at least that second part is. So the first thing, you flip your cards up, which means you'll get your Carderos Search, you'll get your Worm Yagan Bounce, or you'll get your Dark Mimic Draw, in fact. And so I'm very excited to see how this is going to work out versus like Gravekeepers, because while it is going to suck if like my opponent sets a spy and I activate it, they're going to be forced to do something now about it, and then I can just pop all their monsters with the Worm King. So it's not really that big a deal, right? That they get it. I would rather activate it in their end, activate their spies during their end phase, than have to deal with, the repercussions by attacking into it and then having to do something or something like that. As for the end phase effect, it's a lot to take in because it's a lot of text, but let me give an example. Basically, during the end phase, let's say we flipped Carteros, right, and we got our search. We'll usually search Worm Zex. During the end phase, it's going to flip, you draw a card, and then you special summon Worm King from the deck. Now, sometimes what'll happen is you'll draw into the Worm King off that, or you'll have already opened it, which is funny, but it's really not that big a deal. One other thing, I'd like to explain how to resolve two of them, because you can. You absolutely can chain, like let's say they Heavy Storm, you can chain link 1, chain link 2, both of them. So basically what'll happen is it'll flip, you'll get your effect, and then what'll happen during the end phase is it will set, you'll draw a card, Worm King will summon, and then the second effect resolves, it sets, you'll only draw 1, because you only draw cards for the number of light reptiles that were set. So you're not going to draw 2 just because you have 2 set reptiles. The effect only set 1 of them. So you'll draw another card. And another thing that's important to note about Nebula Meteorite is that it does set all of your monsters even if they're not worms. So you can set Dark Mimic level 1 again and then draw a card again on your turn by flipping it face up. Maybe even beta a Veiler or something. And the crazy thing about one thing I didn't mention is the Dark Mimic level 3 draw 2 effect. It's so frightening that a lot of times people will be forced to out it in their main phase 2. Like they'll be forced to scrap Dragon or use another effect. Because like drawing 2 cards in a Chaos deck, like you can draw into BLS, you know? You can draw into any of our other powerful 1-ups that you saw earlier. So it's scary to let that draw 2 effect resolve at the exchange of a little bit of damage. On to the rest of the trap cards. As previously mentioned, Double Call of the Haunted. Very cool. Something about... There's a couple synergies here, right? We mentioned Dark Mimic level 1. We can bring it back and then in our standby phase upgrade it. Another thing is Worm Yagan can only special summon itself if the only monster you control is 1 copy of Worm Zex, specifically. All right? So what that means is that you can go from having no monsters to activating Call of the Haunted targeting Zex and then bringing it back. And that's without using your normal summon. So that's 2 monsters for 1 card. So that's a lot of plus. Those are the 2 big things. And then, of course, any properly summoned Chaos monster we can bring back. Any properly summoned Synchro monster. We can bring back Effect Veiler for Synchro plays. And, of course, Worm King himself, right? We can bring back Worm King, which can start popping cards or just be a big threat, right? So that's that. The rest of the trap cards, we're on 2 copies of Dimensional Prison and 1 copy of Mirror Force. Now, the reason we're on these instead of playing a card like Bottomless Trap Hole or Torrential is because we need to control when our opponents attack. Sometimes we really don't mind our monsters like the Dark Mimics or the Carteros being beat over, but sometimes we would rather flip our monsters on our own and have them survive. And so that's why it's really important to be able to protect our monsters from attacks. Sometimes we'll have to use the Mirror Force to 1-for-1, but a lot of times you can hold on to it, just let your Carteroses and guys be destroyed, and they're like, oh, okay, maybe it's not Mirror Force, right? So it's a lot of mind games that you can do by having these cards in this deck. And you can always like side out a D-Prison, because it is a little bit slow, right? But I really like it. I think it's better than Torrential in this deck, because we want to be able to control our cards to resolve our effect. Otherwise, Nebula Meteorite is going to fizzle. So that's why you don't play Torrential in this deck, but you play these instead. And then, of course, we have the Solemn Brigade. Not much to say here other than the fact that we're not on Starlight Road because our trap count isn't super high. You might be able to justify. I think it's probably decent in this deck, especially because like your opponent might Dark Hole before you get your Nebula Meteorite, and then it's like, what do you do? So you could justify Starlight Road, but I like this better. Sometimes we will use the Solemn Warning just as like almost like another copy of Deep Prison, where we'll prevent our opponent from having access so that we can tempo them out of the game. But a lot of times we want to let our opponents battle into us and then proceed from there. And then we have our last card, the Spicy Tech. This is another reason why I'm playing the Gold Sarks instead of Duality. Ultimate Offering. This deck can definitely plan out its like next couple turns ahead of time. You should always be doing that anyway, but some decks are better at that than others. Decks like Agents, right? It's like, okay, this turn I'm going to normal summon this guy, and the next turn I'll normal summon that guy instead, unless like my plans change. But this deck is really known for that, right? Because you have these two really powerful normal summons that do very different things. And of course, Tour Guide is really good with Ultimate Offering. The key here, while you can use it aggressively to combo off, you can also set a monster from your hand during your opponent's battle phase. Like, so they go to attack directly, and you set a Cardros and Dark Mimic, or you normal summon a Tour Guide. And so that's the 40-card list. And let me show you the extra deck. Again, the side deck is definitely not final. I've definitely been experimenting with it, and it's going to be different between the online tournament and otherwise. So let's start with our level 4s. We have, of course, the Quarter Century Secret Utopia. Steel Swarm Roach. These are a light and a dark. Roach is good for going first. We're not on Thunder King. A lot of times I see decks that play 3 Thunder King play this, and I'm like, you might as well play a second Utopia, honestly, because like it just feels bad to take like an Alias and a Thunder King and go into Steel Swarm Roach. But in this deck, it's really good. It's a dark monster. Zex alone resolving is 2 level 4s. Sure, one of them set, but you know that won't be much of an issue. We can always flip it up with Nebula. And speaking of flip monsters, wind up Zenmeister. At base, he becomes 2,500 because he gains 300 attack for each Xyz material. His other effect is you can detach an Xyz material from this card, target a face-up monster you control, change it to face-down defense position, and then during the end phase, it flips it face-up. Now, obviously, this does combo with Nebula Meteorite, so if I'm being completely honest, I'm actually not sure how that end phase interaction works, but I'm sure there's something cheeky. I'm a little bit new to this deck, so I'll definitely look into the rulings on that on my own. That's something I didn't even consider. But basically, you can get an additional flip face-up with Zen with Yagan, right? And obviously with Book of Moon, you can do some crazy things like where you're using Yagan like 2 to 3 times per turn. I apologize for the yelling, folks. I live with people, if you can call them that. And then, of course, we have for the rank 3s, we have number 17 Leviathan Dragon and Leviair. This is why I wanted to run the Gold Sark, because you can do cute things like banish the Thunder King, or our other side deck one-ofs, and bring them back with Leviair. And of course, this guy can detach and put a dark or light in the grave immediately. Usually, or rather a dark, right? Because it's going to be the Sangans or the Tour Guide or the other thing. And one more thing about this card. This card is extremely underrated in the format. It's the only rank 4 that can immediately detach to put something in the grave for Chaos decks. Usually you'll only see it in Gravekeepers or Worms or a couple other decks that'll obviously wind-ups if you want to play that. But the only other thing you could do that is if you summon Utopia and you attack and then you cancel your own attack, which takes up your battle phase. So wind-up Zenmeister is really cool for that. On to the Synchros. Formula Synchron. We make this with Dark Mimic and our Effect Veiler, right? We can draw a card. And with Call of the Haunted, sometimes you can even get to Librarian plus Formula Synchron. Not often, though. Armory Arm. It's a light, just like Formula Synchron is, and we can make it with our level 3s plus Veiler. The level 4s plus Veiler will make Catastor or Librarian. Librarian is great to beat over Catastor specifically. You can summon it when you're about to combo off. You can summon it against combo decks to make them more hesitant, now that you might have that and Max C. Librarian's great. Are only level 6, because level 6s are a little tricky to make. Bryonic, it's just the best level 6 of the format. It's Chaos Fuel, it's go second OTK potential, and that's pretty much it for level 6s. Level 7s, we have Black Rose Dragon. Obviously, we make this with Chaos Sork plus Veiler or a Stolen Synchro Tuner Monster. Same thing with Arcanite. You can also play Ancient Fairy Dragon because our deck does struggle versus Gravekeeper, so you can get the Closed Forest going. But yeah, it's just really good, right? We actually have another way. If we steal like a level 3 tuner, we have a breaker in the side deck as well. So we have a couple other ways to make spellcasters. Oh, and Librarian, right? You can even... Librarian's a spellcaster, so you can make it and Formula Synchron or a stolen tuner. And I'm sure you can imagine how the rest of the extra deck's going to round out. We have the 2 level 8s of the format, Stardust Dragon and Scrap Dragon. They don't come up often, but, you know, they're just too good to not have. You can, like, steal a Gores or something and make them. And, of course, Trishula, we have Veilers plus a bunch of level 4s, so he's the guy, man. He's the guy. Not much explanation needed. Now for the side deck, which is... might see some changes. It definitely will before the physical tournament. For the online tournament, it is a little bit different. Let's start with the monsters. We have 2 copies of Fossil Dynapaki. Obviously, we can. What's cool about this is that we can flip it up on our opponent's turn with our Nebula Trap. Because remember, it'll flip all monsters face up, and then it'll also flip all monsters face down to be able to reuse them again. So that's really cool, right? That you can flip it up and pop your opponent's board. And then let's say you have BLS in hand, it sets itself again. So you can summon BLS and go for an OTK with just leaving this set card here. And they're like, well, I have to deal with the BLS or I have to deal with the Fossil Dyne, and then I'm back to square one. And then when they next turn, right, let's say I have a BLS, but I wasn't able to finish off my opponent. And then they go to attack in, that's where the cards like D-Prison and Mirror Force come into play. Or they summon like a Thunder King, and I'm like, no, I'm going to warning that. Nice try, buddy. But another thing that's worth mentioning is we are on the double call of the Haunted, so to be able to reuse him, it's just really good. Like you do that same play, right? You go for a push with your big Chaos monsters, and then they somehow survive, and you're like, oh, okay, Call of the Haunted, bring back Fossil Dyna, and then you go from there. More one-ofs. Remember, we are on Ultimate Offering, so being able to use this card is like the king under Ultimate Offering, right? Any deck that plays both Sangan and Ultimate Offering must play this card in the side deck, in my opinion. It's just too good, you know what I mean? Basically, otherwise you can set it in versus Synchro decks. It's not as good in this format as it is in Edison, but the trade-off is that it's easier to get to because you have the more ways to get to Sangan. Instead of just, hey, I have a Gemini deck with like Edison, with Sangan and Ultimate Offering, and it might come up. So yeah, it's really good. Actually, I forgot the other two of Double Maxi. Not much really needs to be said. It helps making, with it being level 2, it does help sometimes with synchros and stuff with Call of the Haunted. But other than that, it's just really good to side in versus like Agents or any meta deck that isn't like Tengu, that isn't like TG Stun or Heroes or something like that. Then we have some one-ups. We have Breaker the Magical Warrior. He's really good in offering decks, and he outs Royal Decree. He's also a spellcaster. He's a dark. He has a couple other synergies as well, but I just really like him. He might be cut for something else. This deck actually has an in-archetype breaker. Worm Apocalypse is a level 1 light reptile. The issue is it is a flip monster, so it's a little slow, but we can do really cool things like controlling when that goes off with our D-Prisons and our Nebula Meteorites. The big downside is that it's mandatory, so you'll have to like pop your own spells and traps if worse comes to worse. But a lot of times you'll have access to Worm Zex and Worm Carderos already, and you'll be going first, so you'll just set the Worm Carderos. And it's like, what do I search, right? Because I'm about to dump a Yagan with the Zex, so do I want to search Yagan? So having Apocalypse as a nice one-of search option is really cool. It's definitely an option you can go for. As I keep talking about, we have the one of Thunder King Ryo. We can reuse him with Call of the Haunted. We have Gold Sarcophagus to get him. We can do the same with Fossil Dyna and the Mole as well, right? We can banish them off of Gold Sarcophagus and summon them back with Levia. Spell cards, we only have a couple. Triple MST, as previously mentioned, we're not on it in the main deck, so we need it. Royal Decree is bad. Other backrow decks are crazy. Closed Forest. This is in the deck for tomorrow online, because there's going to be a lot of Gravekeepers online. My locals doesn't really have Gravekeepers, So this might be a different card. I'm not really sure what yet. Maybe like a Leeching the Light, maybe like a Forbidden Lance, something like that. But yeah, this is obviously really good versus Gravekeepers, which we struggle with because we're a Chaos deck. Dust Shoot. It's a card for going first. It's really good. I didn't really have room for it in the main deck. Main deck's very tight, so it's here, and it's better in the side deck anyway, usually. 2 Debunk. I hate Veiler. I hate Maxi. I hate Reborn Tengu. Is there anything else I need to really say about this card? Not really. It's really good. This could also be like Imperial Iron Wall, but then instead of Gold Sark, you should play Duality, right? So it's like a trade-off. Imperial Iron Wall is cool because you can just keep infinitely bringing back Yagan. And it also counters Heroes, which is what a lot of my locals has. So it's a good option. I might consider it as a one-of here instead of this Black Horn of Heaven, which is just really good for Chaos matchups in case we wanted something other than just the 2 Fossil Dynas for them. And so that's pretty much the deck profile. I mentioned all the synergies with Call of the Haunted, Nebula Meteorite, the extra deck. Tomorrow at noon, I'll be playing in a tournament in the Tournament Nexus Discord. They do Tengu Plant and Edison format. And other than that, yeah, I'll see you guys for the next video.